Hello, and thank you for joining me again today on the Finding Hope After Loss podcast. Today's question is, why is there still so much silence around fertility struggles, pregnancy fears, and loss, especially when there are so many of us that are living it each and every day? In today's episode, I'm joined by author Amy Meyerson, whose novel The Water Lies explores the unspoken emotional terrain of infertility, pregnancy, postpartum, and early motherhood through fiction. She was inspired to write through her own journey into motherhood, and in the book are themes of loss, intuition, judgment, and the gap between what we feel and what we're able to say out loud. We talk about fears that surface before a baby's born, assumptions women face around age and fertility, the lack of protection and fertility treatment, and why stories, especially fictional ones, can sometimes tell the truth in ways that real life can't. Hello, everyone. Today I am here with Amy Meyerson to talk about her new book, The Water Lies. Hi, Amy. How are you doing today?
Hi, I'm good. How are you?
Doing great. I am so excited that you decided to come on and talk today. I'm so excited to talk about your book. Do you want to just share a little about yourself and what kind of inspired you to write this book?
Sure. Yeah. So this is The Water Lies is my fourth novel, but it's my first novel of domestic suspense. I live in the LA area with my family. I have two little kids. One is 3 and one is 6. And then in addition to writing, I also teach at USC. I teach primarily in the writing program and also teach some classes on publishing. So
Oh, you're
very,
busy.
very much very busy. Yeah, it's a lot to juggle at once. But yeah, so this novel, The Water Lies, it's set in a different part of LA than I live in. It's set in Venice Beach along the Venice canals, which are when Venice was originally built. It was built to sort of be inspired by Venice, Italy. And so basically the whole area used to be canals. Almost all of them have been paved over other than like a small section, which is now both very expensive and a tourist destination. So my book is set along the canals. It focuses on one family in particular who lives along the canals, Tessa, who is about 8.5 months pregnant when the novel starts and has a toddler. And they're at a coffee shop near her house at the beginning of the book. And he spots this woman that he seems to know. And he's kind of he's pre-verbal, but he's trying to get this woman's attention. His mom, Tessa, has never seen her before. The woman feels really uncomfortable with the intensity of which Jasper, the boy, is trying to get her attention. So it's one of these sort of awkward moments. He has a tantrum. She feels mom shamed. And then the next, she goes home, she tries to forget all about it. And then the next morning, there's a body that's found in the canal right outside her house. And it is the body of the woman who her son seemed to have recognized in the coffee shop. So she panics. She doesn't think it's a coincidence. Yet her son can't communicate to her how he seemed to know this woman. So she starts to look into it to see who this woman was and, how she may have ended up right outside her house. Simultaneously, the woman who died, Regina, her mom lives on the opposite side of the country in New Jersey. She hears that her daughter got drunk and accidentally drowned. She doesn't believe it. Her daughter's been sober for 7 years. She knows that she wouldn't risk that. So she hops on a plane and starts trying to investigate to find out what happened, what she thinks really happened to her daughter. So pretty quickly, the two moms kind of team up, and it's amateur sleuth story that's really all about motherhood. And so I kind of what inspired me to write this book was like sort of two things at once. It was becoming a mother, and I think in particular, I was really interested. My son was an early speaker, but that seemed to magnify the disconnect between what he wanted to communicate and what he was able to communicate. And so I was really interested in that disconnect and I think, thrillers that I like are ones that take something that's sort of an everyday frustration or fear and magnifies them. So so I think it's frustrating when kids are unable to communicate, but I was like, what if that was instead kind of terrifying? And then simultaneously I wanted to write a thriller, which I'd never done before. So I sort of went all in on both, all in on a book about motherhood and all in on a book that is suspenseful.
Yeah, I mean, it has so many themes that are, so relevant to all mothers and, things that we don't often talk about, things that we don't often, think about. But, I think it's interesting that you took that communication and made it into a fear because that is something that's scary as a mother. Like, how does my child know this? Like, what are they trying to tell me? And you don't fully understand. And I think that can be scary sometimes.
Yeah, and I think also, I think pretty much every parent has that moment at some point where they're out with their kid and their kid knows someone that, usually it's a kid from school or something like that, but it's this realization that you're at some point, you're so intensely connected to your children when they're little, but they start to have their own lives. And I think that that is kind of scary too, letting go and also realizing that you can be a good inspiration to them, but ultimately they are their own people. And so I think that that's part of the fear of it too, as well.
And I know another thing that you wrote about, throughout the book was Tessa's fears of how was she going to bond with this child when this baby was born, or, other fears that mothers have before their children are born. Was that something that you kind of dealt with too, or where did that inspiration come from?
Yeah, you mentioned a moment ago that there's a lot in the book that like people don't really talk about. And I think that was one of the things that was so surprising to me when I was trying to get pregnant and then ultimately did was how much is unspoken, right? And that in having so many things still be taboo about the process of trying to get pregnant, the experience of being pregnant, of giving birth, that it really produces a lot of shame. And it's certainly people, particularly people with platforms and celebrities are more vocal about aspects of that experience, but I think there's still a lot of space to vocalize more. And so I tried to put in this book a lot of the little things that I'd never heard anyone else talk about. I was really surprised when I got pregnant with my daughter, the the guilt I felt for my like that I was somehow taking something from my son. And it was a really surprising feeling to worry, there's all sorts of worries of like what if your kids don't like each other? There's also, all of these worries of who is this person that's growing inside of you and things like that. But I was really surprised that I hadn't really heard anyone mention that before, the kind of guilt around that. And then there was a lot of aspects of both trying to get pregnant and being pregnant that I experienced that I put in the book that I hadn't really heard anyone. I feel like pe people still don't talk about, particularly a lot with C-sections too.
Yeah, that is a big one. Yeah, I mean, because it makes I've never gone through a C-section,
Mhm.
but a lot of the things that I've heard from it, it's just like, oh, that isn't real birth, or, things like that. And it's like, but it is.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a major surgery that you're going
Yeah.
through.
I actually hadn't heard that until after I'd already had two C-sections, that people didn't think it was like real delivery or whatever. But I do remember right after, because like with my son, it was kind of like in the book, sort of an emergency situation. And afterwards, I was like, that was major surgery. And it's just been so normalized as something that women get, even multiple times. And I was surprised at how shocked I was. I was like, of course it's major surgery, but it's viewed as routine.
Yeah, I mean, I feel
And
like
so
if you have surgery for any other reason, weight loss surgery or other things that are in that same kind of area, you're sent home with all these care instructions and all. I mean, it's a big deal. But women who have a C-section, I mean, you get instructions, but it's kind of like, okay, well, just go home and come
yeah.
back if there's problems.
Yeah, I think there's this expectation that you bounce back really quickly.
So what was kind of the inspiration for, there's a lot of themes of like infertility and, loss in the book. So what inspired that? Is it just another one of those things we don't talk about often?
Yeah, well, I mean, a couple of things. Which I don't think is revealing anything. The husband in the book is a fertility doctor. And my sister-in-law is a fertility specialist. And she's very good about keeping everything, about her clients. She takes, those privacy guarantees very seriously. But, she talked to me through a lot of stuff in terms of like initial stages of trying to get pregnant. And she also, she just kind of like taught me a lot about the industry just by being close with her. So I was really interested in all of that. And I think that was, around the same time as like I was trying to get pregnant and my friends were trying to get pregnant. And, we've had a a wide variety of experiences. And I wanted to try to include as many of those as possible in the book. And the way I felt like I could do that was sort of through a fertility doctor. And it felt like a good way of being able to be sort of overt about the, frustrations that grow within like a lot of silence around struggles. And I think, I think compared to a lot of women, I didn't have extreme struggles, but even within it taking more than I wanted to get pregnant, there was like a monthly sense of shame. And there's just so much of trying to get pregnant in the early days of being pregnant, just it feels like these sort of horrible mind games of like what you're allowed to tell people when you shouldn't. And, it's why, to me, I was always very open because it's like if anything, happens, I want my community to be supportive. I don't want to have to like suffer through things in secrecy. So I think I was just thinking about a lot of that stuff. And then also, I was 37 when I had my son and 40 when I had my daughter. And so I also was is more so 37 than 40, but just surprised at the assumptions because I was like older that came with it. And sort of the even though there's a lot of women who are having babies a little bit later, but the sort of shame around that and the sort of assumptions that you waited too long and things. So I just like it was all so ever present in my life that I wanted to try to put as much of it in the book as possible because I think that I love like mom novels. I've been calling this a mom thriller. And there's been a lot of books about motherhood out lately, but I feel like they often capture extremes in that a lot of them are about reluctant motherhood and are great novels, like I was thinking like Mad Woman and All Fours and books like and I guess The Push to a certain extent, or they're about like children who might be sort of evil in some context, or they're about postpartum. And it sort of seems to be and I think I'm glad that there's space for all of that, but I just felt like in response to trying to capture some of the stronger reactions and some that are obviously like the demonic children not
Yeah.
real. But I just felt like in response to that, my experiences and the experiences of most women I know weren't really being captured in those stories. And so I wanted to look at like how motherhood is really hard even when you do want it, and to look at I think I tried to capture because I don't think personally that I had postpartum, but I had a lot of anxiety afterwards. And I think that there's also this feeling a lot of like, well, if it's not sort of a diagnosed postpartum, then you don't really have a right to complain or to feel anxious or stuff like that. And so again, I just wanted to capture those, like I still, if my kids are sleeping too deeply, check their breathing. Like there's just like anxieties like that I think most people feel. So I just really wanted to try to, short of some of the things that happen in the novel, have readers feel seen and connected to what's going on the page, particularly mothers.
There was definitely a lot of those moments where I just felt connected, like, oh man, like this describes perfectly what I went through at, this point in pregnancy or postpartum, or just there's just so many even little moments, especially relating to like the infertility and loss part, without like giving anything away, just like little moments that I'm like, oh, like I resonate with that and I know where this is going before you even fully kind of explain it, if that makes sense.
Yeah, yeah. And I also wanted to I thought it was really interesting too to look at kind of the beginning of motherhood in conversation with the end of motherhood, which is the other character in the book, Barb. And kind of she's been like distanced from her daughter and there's a lot of guilt over that. And so I wanted to sort of put that in conversation and also kind of the way that society treats women at different points in time. I mean, I think I was really I just when I was pregnant, I just felt like very on display. And it's even today in like the modern era, the fact that people feel comfortable touching you or giving you advice like strangers. I remember when my daughter was very little, we were at the grocery store, and keep in mind this is California in LA, so it's very warm. And I didn't have socks on her feet when she was like an infant. And some woman came up to me and started yelling at me in the grocery store for not having socks on in 90-degree weather on my
Oh my
baby's
gosh.
feet. And it's just like little stuff like that. And then I do think that also one of the things that struck me as I've learned more about fertility, and there are the extremes, there's like documentaries about them and stuff, but is how little it's regulated and how ripe it is like potentially for exploitation. And so and I think it's because of the way like you're talking with loss and infertility and issues like that, the way we treat women when they're in those places and the way it creates this culture. So I sort of wanted to, through the fertility doctor talk about that stuff too, because I think it's an important part of the industry.
That is something that I think we don't think about until you kind of step back and look at it, that there really aren't a lot of protections in place for people who go through fertility treatment. I mean, you're having to put a lot of faith in this person that they're going to, you know, use the correct sperm, use the correct egg, like not mess up, not
Yeah.
do something that you don't want them to do. And there's no recourse for that, really.
Yeah, and I was surprised when I was talking to doctors about, I mean, there's so many wonderful fertility doctors, and this is definitely like saying, hey, this is not an indictment on the industry at all. In fact, it's like the opposite. It's a to me, it's like a call for more regulations around it to protect women, because yeah, a lot of states don't really have that many laws around clinics, and there are places like there's that will do things that are, you know, not, unsanctioned and stuff like that. And obviously in hopes of helping people get pregnant, but it's it can be ripe for, some less than legitimate
Yeah.
things. So yeah, I wanted to, it felt important to me in a story that explores motherhood to look at kind of again like all of those facets.
Yeah, and I feel like women who are, struggling to get pregnant. I mean, as someone who's been there myself, we didn't go through IVF, but we did other fertility treatment. And you get to a point where you're just so desperate to, get pregnant that you're like, let me just, anything that doctor says, I'm like, I'll do it. Just tell me what I
Yeah.
need to do, I'll do it. And it makes it really hard because you're just so vulnerable. And
Yeah. And, it's disappointing to think that somebody would exploit that, but there are people that will. And there's, I think with a lot of like new areas of science, like things don't get put into law until there's instances of it being exploited or gone wrong or something like that. So I do think that there are more protections than there used to be. But yeah, but it really it does speak to that fundamental like desire and the way that it can, if it's in the wrong hands, it can be taken advantage of. So, yeah. But, and I think that I mean, one of the things that struck me too, as I was saying before, is I listened to some podcasts with fertility doctors and just the way I think part of that like desperation you're talking about comes from the way if you wait too long or I mean, I think that's a big one. Would like, in quotates, like, you know what I
yeah,
mean? But there's these, there's, if you didn't freeze your eggs when you were 25, there's this kind of like, I don't think it's intentional, but it feels like blame.
yeah.
Like you didn't do what you were supposed to if you wanted this, and I think that also kind of fosters feelings of guilt and desperation too. And there's, and I understand it. Like I think it's a tangent, but when I was in my 20s for a little bit, I worked for sports medicine doctor. I can't remember the embarrassing, I can't. But everyone that came in to see us was somebody who needed surgery for an injury, and so that like skewed the way that he thought about. And I was like sort of taught at working there to sort of think about the body. And I do think when you are a fertility specialist and all you see are people who are struggling to get pregnant for a variety of reasons, it does kind of like desensitize you to it sometimes. And so, and also sort of you think then, like that was one thing that struck me too, is that, the doctors that I was listening to on podcasts and stuff kind of just assumed anyone who was like 37 or older, like could never possibly get pregnant on their own. So but that's what they see. They don't see the people who do. So,
Yeah, no, I get
um,
what you're saying. Yeah.
yeah, there's just a lot of, and I think that women often end up having to take on the brunt of that, even if a lot of fertility issues are not because of the woman.
Yes, definitely. Yeah, I was 35 when I had my last daughter, and yeah, I was lovingly called a geriatric pregnancy. And I was like, oh, thank you. Thank you for that. I feel wonderful hearing myself being referred to as old all the time now.
Yeah, me too.
So, one of the things I really loved about the book is that it is a fiction book, and most of the books surrounding, motherhood, infertility, loss, things like that are more nonfiction or more, stories, people telling their stories, which is great to read, but sometimes you have to kind of be in that right headspace to,
Yeah.
read those things. So I really enjoyed that this had all of those themes in it that I could relate to, but also had that thriller like story element to it. I haven't really seen too many fiction ones out there that do that.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, there's a few that are coming out about, different aspects of early motherhood and pregnancy and stuff like that. There's a book coming out in February called Pinky Swear, which I read, which is really good, which is about a woman who has fertility issues, and so she gets her childhood best friend to be her surrogate. And then she disappears 4 days before she's supposed to deliver the baby. So things go very, very wrong. But there have been a few, but yeah, I mean, I think what I always try to do in writing is write a book that I feel like should exist but doesn't. And so I always want to try to write something that feels like it hasn't been done before. But I also really wanted this book to be, because another big part of this for me was about intuition. I felt like another part of when you're pregnant, particularly when you're very visibly pregnant, in addition to people treating you like your public property in a lot of ways, is they assume that you are emotional
Yeah.
or you're overreacting if you have a reaction to things. And I found all of that very frustrating and also made me doubt myself sometimes of like, am I just being irrational? Like, am I just being pregnant? So I wanted that to be a big part of the book too, in that Tessa knows that something is off about the fact that her son recognizes. She's certain her son recognized this woman, and she's certain that this isn't a coincidence. I think everybody around her is just telling her, like, you're pregnant. It's scary that like something like this could happen, an accident like this could happen so close. Or it makes sense that you feel this way, but it's just you being pregnant. And so I really wanted to celebrate female intuition, but particularly like maternal intuition in that way. Same thing with Barb, who's the older mother, in that she has these instincts that for other reasons society is telling her to ignore. And so that to me was really important because I felt like I maybe being a little vague here, but it was like, steadfast in a lot of things that I was feeling when I was pregnant. And yet I felt like the world around me was telling me to doubt. So I also wanted it. So I think with that, it has a lot of these more intense themes, but it also has a lot of celebratory themes too. And then I also just wanted to make it, when I started working on this book as before, like I really wanted to write a thriller. And during the pandemic, I started reading a lot of thrillers, and that was sort of what gave me the inspiration to try to write one. And I think that, even though thrillers tend to be to varying degrees a little violent, mine's not, I don't think mine's super violent, but there's like moments at the end that are a little bit anxiety inducing. But even though they tend to be that way, there is something escapist about them. And it doesn't, I think for the large part, the kind of, there's a death in the book, like it feels like in thrillers, it feels disconnected to those experiences as we have them in real life or in kind of what's going on in our country right now. And so I think that it's kind of like a lot of people read fantasy too. It serves as an escape, these kinds of books, especially if they're propulsive and that like page turning quality. And so I really wanted to write something that while it resonated and talked about real issues that I feel like should be discussed more. It also is just kind of fun to read. I mean, that's a fundamental goal of whenever I write something is I want it to be enjoyable. I want it to be fun. I want readers to get lost for a period of time and get to escape whatever else may be going on in their lives.
Which I love, which is the main reason why I want to read these kinds of books. So, you
Yeah.
know, yeah, and I definitely didn't guess what was happening until the end. I was like, oh my gosh, like I didn't see that coming. So I think that was, there's a lot of people who are like, oh, I guessed, different thrillers that you read. Oh, I guessed that in the first, chapter or whatever. This is one I could not have guessed.
I think it helped that I kind of like I knew vaguely how I what happens, but not the specifics, and that they evolved as my story evolved. So I think it helped that I also didn't know what happened before I started writing, and I figured it out along the way. Also, not, I mean, I don't think this gives too much away that it ends up being a murder instead of just an accident, because otherwise it wouldn't really be a thriller, right?
Yeah.
So I don't think that that gives too much away. But the in the initial drafts I had a similar story but different person. And so I think that helps too, is that I kind of went back in and changed it. But it was important to me. I wanted it to be because I am one of those people who I often guess what's coming and what's going to happen and like who the killer is. And so I think it's just because I read a lot and I write stories. In movies, I guess it a lot too. So I really wanted it to be surprising and not be something that was too telegraphed from the beginning. So I had some writer and reader friends read it and tell me like where they figured things out so I could kind of pinpoint like where most readers would probably guess or not guess how long they would probably be in the dark for.
I love that. I think that's such a great way to do it. And then you can change those things if too many people are guessing it too early or
Yeah. Yeah, it's really important to have readers for that reason, especially for these kinds of books, because it's hard to tell. Like the new book I'm working on, I'm struggling with this right now. It's hard to tell when you're giving a clue versus giving a reveal. And so you really need other people to read it to tell you that.
I was just going to say that was going to be my next question is, are you working on, I know this one is just out, but is there anything else that you're working on?
Yeah, the next it's still like about parenthood, but it's a little bit different. It's about a third grade camping trip where the families, which is something that I forget where you are located
In Texas.
in Texas. Maybe you do this in Texas too, I'm not sure. But when I moved to California, some of my friends were telling me that with their kids' elementary schools, they would all go on a camping trips together. And even though most of them had never been camping before, and I just found that so surprising because I'm from the East, like the Northeast, and we didn't do that growing up. I mean, of course, some families camp, but this idea of these like grade wide camping trips. So I found that very interesting. So it's about a third grade school camping trip to the Channel Islands, which are these islands off the coast of Ventura, California. Two of them, the one where the book is set, is a national park. It's the most remote national park in the park system. And so when the families go there, I mean, my kind of tagline for it is like, you can't leave your secrets on the mainland. When the families go there, things quickly go wrong with their camping trip, but no children are harmed.
Okay, good. I was like, that
Yeah.
makes me anxious. No.
Yes. No, no, no. There is like a little bit of a scare with some children, but no children are in danger. It's really about the parents. So it's sort of like a Big Little Lies kind of White Lotus type story. It's been really fun to write. I got to go to the Channel Islands camping a couple of times, which was great. My son really wants me to take him there, and I think he would love it, but it's like an hour and a half boat ride.
So quite a
He's
ways.
not a very good swimmer, so that makes me nervous. And it's like
Yeah.
a rocky boat ride. So,
See, I'm learning all about like the geography of California through this. Like I never knew about the canals or anything like that. I thought that was really interesting to read
yeah.
about.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, that was one of so, the that kind of came about organically in this book because I knew I had this as soon as I had this idea of the scene in the coffee shop where there's this moment. The I knew that it would be like that the woman would drown. And so I knew I needed water. And then I tried to think of really like scenic places where there was water close by to people's houses. And that led me to think about the Venice canals. And then when I was working on this, thinking of the next book, one of the things my editor talked to me about as sort of a consistent thing throughout was these, I think she called it aspirational settings, but these places with really big settings. And I love when books, yeah, expose me to little pockets of things that I don't know much about. And the canals are really interesting. The Channel Islands are, they're just, I mean, people, probably the most famous one is Catalina, but that's the only one that's like built up. There's hotels and stuff, but they're really just really beautiful and unlike anywhere else in the US. So
I'm curious, random question, but do they actually really drain the canals and do all of that?
that was stuff that I learned about. Yeah, so the canals, because they only have water coming in and out from one way, they can't get like flushed through. They have to drain them and then they have to clear out the algae. You know, it's funny. A couple weeks ago I went back to the canals for the first time since I finished writing the book. And when I was writing the book, I guess because of the time of year I was there, the canals were always empty and there's always people cleaning them and they smelled really bad. And then a few weeks ago I went and the water was high, it was blue, like clear blue water. It was a beautiful day and I was like, did I just imagine all of that with the stench and the but it's like, oh right, this is kind of the point of it in the book is that it's constructed and it's really easy to just see the scenic after as opposed to the maintenance that it requires.
Yeah, it sounds like it would be nice to live there doing the nice parts, but not doing the draining parts. That sounds like a lot of work.
Yeah, well, it's also it's a very it's kind of like living in like a diorama or a Disneyland or something. It's it's funny because it's like if you walk one block away, you can totally miss them. Like they really are a concentrated kind of big rectangle, but it's easy to miss if you don't know what you're looking for. Yet at the same time, especially with Wi-Fi or Google and TripAdvisor and stuff like that, they've become incredibly popular destination. It's a huge spot for people to take like social media posts, photos and stuff because it's really, really lovely. And so there's just constantly people there. And it's you kind of have to get used to, for the people I've talked to who live there or lived there in the past, you just have to get used to people like staring at you all the time. And like sometimes people will do things like they'll come onto your patio to like take a picture and things where you would assume like the everyday rules of society would prevent people from
Right?
doing that. But like there's this sense of because there's so many people walking around, there's sort of this sense of like public ownership which I just realized is kind of similar to like feeling pregnant.
Yeah, that's what I was just thinking. I was wondering if that was on purpose, the looking exposed and then, feeling like on display to the world, because that's how the house was and how.
Yeah, I mean, not as directly as I just said. I did just feel like I had a little realization, but I did want it to have. I was thinking kind of like Hitchcock's like Rear Window of like people looking in through each other. But I did want it to create a little bit of a sense of, which is one of the ongoing questions of like paranoia of like is Tessa just anxious or are her feelings, rational? And so the kind of claustrophobia of this life and of being on display heightens all the other things she's feeling.
So if people are interested in reading the book, where would they go to get that?
Any bookstore or Amazon will have it. It's called The Water Lies. And yeah, if they do read it and it resonates with them, I love hearing from readers, knowing what they connected with and more so when they like the book than when they don't. But
Yeah, 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 I can imagine. You have to have kind of tough skin, I guess, to. I don't do
yes, but
well
I
with the
do think,
criticism.
yeah, I do think parenthood trains you very well for it. My daughter is very blunt, and I simultaneously think she's training me for when she's a teenager and for like brushing other stuff off too, because she'll tell me exactly what she thinks with not really any consideration for whether or not, it might be too blunt.
Kids are so great at that. I'm
Yeah.
like, oh, thank you. I feel great after you said that.
And I will say, I mean, not, I will say one of the things I've also talked about a lot is how inspiring kids are for creativity and particularly for being a writer, both in terms of their imaginations and just in terms of like the collection of experiences. I think there's this assumption, and it does make it harder, right? Like it's hard to find the time to fit everything in, and there's guilt that comes with that, with taking time away to work in isolation when, but I think there's this idea of like, people often are like, how can you parent and write at the same time? Like, how as a mother can you do both? And while there are some challenges in terms of limitations of time, kids are so inspirational. And I think really being a mom has really, really enriched my writing life. So I try to write about it as much as possible.
Well, yeah, I definitely hope you continue writing because I loved it. I can't wait to read the next one when it comes out too.
Let you know.
Thank you so much for coming on and sharing about your book today. Thank you so much, Amy, for sharing about your book with us. As we close out the conversation today, I hope this episode reminded you that all of those thoughts that you've had, any fears, questions, those moments you weren't sure that you were allowed to talk about out loud, they are not only valid, but they are also shared by so many other people. I promise you are not alone in your thoughts. If this conversation did resonate with you, I'd love for you to stay connected. Make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss any future episodes. If you like the show, please leave a quick review or rating on Apple or Spotify. It really helps the show reach more people who are quietly walking through infertility, loss, and complicated pregnancies. Thank you so much for tuning in, and remember, we are all in this together.